All right, so last time we talked a little bit about how to approach the market research, and today we're going to go into a little bit more detail on the marketing mix. So specifically covering the 4 Ps, which we'll get to in a minute here, and then looking at your distribution strategy more closely. And finally, we're going to talk about the production estimates calculator and how to plug all of your numbers into that.
Fantastic. So usually when a farmer is just starting out, you may have identified a number of crops that you're interested in growing or that you have capability to grow. But what we want to do today is really narrow it down, look at a couple specific crops that you can build your farm on, and kind of get some of the pricing figured out and really the specifics. So we're after the specifics today. And here's a quote from Jean-Martin Fortier, who is known for his book, The Market Gardener. He says that lettuce, in terms of profitability, lettuce is right up there with tomatoes and cucumbers. And so that's really where we're jumping in. These are popular crops that you can sell to a variety of customers at a good price, and they're something that you can grow. So the challenge is that when you narrow down your crop selection, you're always going to leave something out. You may have a customer that likes the Bibb lettuce or another customer that likes an oak leaf, and we're really trying to narrow it down. Right, Elsif?
Yep.
So another thing is when you take on too many crops at once, it can really start to complicate your crop scheduling, how you're managing each crop turn, delivery and harvest schedules. So we're really trying to narrow it down so that your farm is manageable in those early months, and then we'll take a look at some more of the details. So in particular, we're using a framework called the marketing mix. And Elsif, can you help explain a little bit more what the marketing mix is like?
Yeah, so the marketing mix is really, what does your product look like, who is purchasing this product, and what are they paying for it? So we're talking about product, promotion, price, and place. Those are the 4 Ps that make up this marketing mix. So you started talking about crops a little bit, so I think we can just jump in and talk about products specifically.
In this workshop, we focus on crops that are specific to the Zip farm. And it's important to mention right away, crops like tomatoes, cucumbers, the fruiting crops are not going to be relevant for this workshop. And the reason is because for the 4-season production, we're really focused on those crops that can be brought to harvest quickly under supplemental lighting and that can meet the economics that we need to have for the farm. So we'll be focusing primarily on a line of leafy greens and herbs. We do have a selection on what types of leafy greens or herbs we can grow, but that's what we're looking at. And these are a perfect place to start for the indoor 4-season farmer.
Yep. So with product, we're looking at, what crops are you growing specifically? And then we're also looking at how these are packaged, because this is part of that product you're delivering to your customer. So if we jump back to the crop mix, we're talking about greens and herbs. And I always recommend to farmers to grow as many herbs as you can. Herbs have a really high price per pound. You're always going to be getting a higher price for herbs than you can for greens and lettuce. Of course, every market's different, and you don't know how many herbs you can sell into a market. Here in Laramie, it'd be really hard to sell all herbs. We have a town of about 35,000 people. But in a larger city, it's much easier to sell a lot of herbs. So it all goes back to that market research, but definitely pushing as much herbs as you can into the market.
And up in Minnesota, where we mentioned Localize, it's a metro area of around 4 million people, very large area. They can put the basil on the shelves in 14 different retail locations, really strong demand for their herbs. So definitely, if you have the market for it, go for the herbs.
Yeah, and in a lot of our examples, we'll be breaking it up, usually like a 50-50 split between greens and herbs, just to kind of get that balance. But if you can sell all herbs, that's awesome. Your financials are going to look a lot better. So
that's right. And if you have a smaller market for herbs, we can adjust our production to focus on about 20% herbs, 80% greens. And in that scenario, the price for the greens is a little bit lower, but it's usually a steady volume. You can really do a good job selling those greens. and then slowly build up your herb market as you have time and market demand.
Right. We have other growers doing really well with small heirloom heads of lettuce and getting pretty good prices for that. So that could be an opportunity too. I just think the easiest place to start is with herbs. But of course, you need to look into that opportunity for greens as well.
Right. And the big picture here, before we move on, when we're talking about local food, it's a new category that you may be one of the few producers in your area that really has a local crop. So you can almost choose any type of crop selection or category, introduce a local brand, and you're going to see some interest in that crop.
Yep, and that product you end up choosing is also going to determine what type of packaging you have. So if you are selling all herbs to a retail chain, you're probably selling all of these in clamshells, so you need to be thinking about labeling. Whereas if you're selling to restaurants, a bulk bin that can be reused works just fine. That end customer just cares about that product, and then they'll make it beautiful before that end consumer gets it.
Good. So this is the product P, and we're kind of trying to narrow down what crop you'll be growing, how it will be packaged, what it'll look like, and what's the next P in the marketing mix.
So next we're going to talk about promotion. So this can include social media, any advertising, your website. How are people going to hear about your brand and your product?
The promotion is where your customers see your product, learn about it, and they have the opportunity to buy it. So in retail locations, the customer is going to see that on the shelf. They have the choice to buy it, but keep in mind that the retail customer is not actually your customer. You're going to have to sell that product to the produce manager. So in that situation, you're going to have promotions that can reach a produce manager. Could be person-to-person sales. You could have a brochure with a crop list available showing your pricing. The type of promotion that you're going to be doing, it affects, what kind of crop, the volume, other choices that you're going to be making with your crops.
Right. And it's important to look at the big picture here too. Maybe use Instagram so that your farmers markets can see which stores they'll be selling into, and you can kind of use that to generate demand for that grocery store, and make sure that groceries, the produce manager knows that you have built up that brand. People are wanting your product, and that makes that sale a lot easier as well.
So anytime someone sees your promotion, they're going to be brought back to your brand. They're going to say, I want to learn more about this farm. And so we really encourage strong branding, particularly around fresh, local, delivered within 24 hours from the time of harvest. This is a kind of branding that other people will have a very hard time competing with. And it can be very powerful.
Yep.
And another thing to mention is that once someone tastes your product, they're going to get the idea it's a fresh local product. It's much different than what is available on the shelves currently.
Yeah, so maybe just focus in on those 3 key selling points that you want people to know when they think about your brand. Local, fresh, and maybe even personable. They know the farmer. You come into the store. They have a face to associate with that brand.
I've even advocated that you put your face on the label. That's a Smith's Farm.
Yeah.
So these are the kinds of decisions that you'll be making when you start to get into your promotion.
Yep. Another thing that works well for that is just putting your address there. People will be familiar with what area you're in, and then it's kind of a cool thing to talk about if they live a few miles away, that the basil that they're using for drinks on a Friday night or whatever was grown a few miles down the road.
That's right. Very exciting. And so next, we're going to get into the price. Price is really one of the more technical discussions that we have. We don't have a lot of time to get into it today. Elsif and I both studied pricing in college, and it can be very technical. So we're not going to do a long tutorial on pricing theory. What are the main points we want to cover here, Elsif?
So the important thing is to just think about how you might go about pricing. And we always recommend that people do more value-based pricing, because you're not selling the standard commodity that's on the shelf and shipped from Mexico or California. What you're providing is much different and much better. So it's important to look at that market pricing in your area for a baseline. You want to make sure you're adding to that and getting that premium.
So I was going to ask Elsif, can you give an idea what kinds of premium pricing that we've seen out in the market?
Yeah, as a conservative starting point, we're seeing for greens, maybe $3.50 wholesale and $5.25 retail. Like I said, that's a conservative starting point, and it ranges a lot depending on where you're at in the country. For herbs, we're looking at closer to $16 a pound wholesale and $24 a pound retail.
Mm-hmm. But we've also seen farmers getting more than this.
Yes.
Particularly in urban areas or northern locations where they may not have a lot of local farms situated around the city.
Right.
And the East Coast, obviously, Chicago, northern states. So it does depend a little bit on regional pricing.
Yes, for sure. We have people getting anywhere from, $12 a pound retail for greens up to 30 pounds for greens retail. So there's a lot of flexibility there.
And it does come back to what kind of market are you pursuing, specialty markets versus a more commodity market. So again, try not to price your crops as a commodity. They're going to be the freshest local product on the shelf.
Yep. Get a price in mind and stick to it when you go talk to people, because they're used to negotiating for a living, and this is probably your first time doing that. So just have your number set in your mind, go in and talk and get their feedback.
Perfect. That covers our pricing discussion. We do have default pricing locked in for our production estimate spreadsheet, and we'll get to that a little bit later. Next is the place, the next P.
So this is where the transaction is happening, whether it's in a restaurant, farmer's market, CSA, grocery store. Where is that product getting sold?
So you want to have the right product at the right place, at the right time, at the right price. And a couple trade-offs you should keep in mind. First, if you have a lot of smaller customers, restaurants or farmer's market customers, you're going to spend more time servicing all those small customers. So they'll be buying a smaller volume, but you'll have to go to more locations to sell all of your crops. On the other hand, if you have a few larger customers, like a grocery retail outlet, you can sell a higher volume and have less customer service and less delivery time involved in getting that product to the market. However, wholesale pricing is usually lower. So one takeaway we want to have here is it does kind of depend on your preferences. If you would prefer to service just a couple larger customers, that can be a good strategy to reduce the time that you spend going to market or servicing multiple restaurants.
Yeah, preferences, the size of your operation too, because if you're just starting small, maybe it's easier to just start at a farmer's market and get more feedback that way. There's a lot of factors that play into this decision, and there's not, a one-size-fits-all answer here. Another thing to point out is we do have the 4 Markets course on Upstart University, where we go into a lot more depth. So that's a course we recommend, and we don't want to be too repetitive here. But yes, it comes down to the market research, but also just your preference, the size of your farm, and how you want to move forward.
Good. And you do have a month membership to Upstart University. So jump in there, take advantage of that membership, and take the 4 Markets course. All right.
So the last topic related to the place is your distribution strategy and what barriers to entry you may face. And we've kind of organized this from easiest to hardest. So the easiest place to sell into first would be like a farmer's market, like I mentioned, or starting a CSA, just because you can be really flexible with how much produce you have, the pricing. It's just going to be more time consuming, but that may not be a bad thing as you're getting up and running and working the kinks out.
Yeah, a couple benefits there. If your pricing isn't working out, you can raise it or lower it. It's not going to be a huge deal at the farmer's market. Whereas if you get into a restaurant or a grocery store, your pricing is going to be more locked in.
Yep.
So you really have to be more knowledgeable going into those larger supply agreements.
Yeah, and restaurants are like the, medium level, I would say, barrier to entry. It'll depend on the restaurants in your area. Like if you have a lot of local food-based restaurants that are willing to work with you, be flexible, or do you have more traditional restaurants that may want set quantities, more traditional pricing, and they're not as concerned with that local aspect.
And one piece of feedback that we've heard is that restaurants can be fickle. The chef can change his or her mind based on seasonality. They might have a menu item and then they don't want your product anymore. So it can be hard to get that consistency with the restaurant.
Yep.
And that's one piece of feedback that we've heard.
Yeah, so that's one side of it. If you do find a restaurant manager who really is organized and the chef and the manager are planning out their menu quite a ways, the opportunity there is the ability to sell custom products specifically for them. Maybe they want lemon basil. I know people have gone in and asked chefs what they would like, and no one's ever asked them before, so they don't have an answer. But that's an exciting thing to be able to provide if it's a good match.
Good. And the other point we have to mention is if you're going for the larger retail outlets or even restaurants, the food distribution service can be an option for you. These are the food brokers. However, anytime you get into distribution with a logistics company, you're going to be paying a middleman. They'll take a cut of the revenues. So you do have to account for that in your business planning.
Yeah, there'd be more benefit with something like that when you're at a larger scale. And they probably have minimum amounts that you need to be providing them for them to even take you on as a customer.
Good. So can you help us understand real quick, what do you need to have to approach a larger customer like a retail outlet?
So when you're ready to sell into a grocery store and work with that produce manager, you really have to have your production locked down, and that customer needs to come first. Because if you start missing weeks and they can't count on you, they're not going to be motivated to work with you and keep your product on the shelf over a product that they know they can get deliveries for twice a week. So I'd recommend jumping into that as soon as you've worked the kinks out of your system and you put that customer first. And then if you have, a restaurant, CSA farmers market, those are the customers you can be more flexible with in terms of quantity and just the level of forgiveness available there.
Yeah, good. And know your pricing, know how to negotiate, and go in there and really make a strong case for your product.
Yep, and if you're not confident, a farmer's market is a great way to get feedback, kind of find that pricing level, and you'll feel a lot better going into those conversations with any produce manager.
Good. So here's an example of a farmer, Curtis Stone, who's delivering his veggies on a bicycle. And this is just an example how easy it can be. He makes around once or twice a week to a number of restaurants. Easy peasy.
Yeah, maybe not in the summer in Texas, but for some climates, it's a great option.
Well, and you bring up a good point, Elsif. If you're handling your own distribution, you may need to consider cold transportation.
Yep.
In the industry, they call this the cold chain. And so you really want to make sure that if you're getting into larger distribution, you have the ability to keep the crops cool on the way to market.
Yeah, and just a side note there, it doesn't need to be a very expensive build out. We have one customer that just puts chilled water bottles in a cooler with basil, just to keep it slightly cool and insulated as he makes deliveries.
Okay. So these are some of the trade-offs that you have to have in mind. Elsif, this is kind of a crash course in marketing, but I hope that you find this information valuable. We do have a PDF worksheet that you can download here, and we go into a little bit more detail. And I've also provided some examples, kind of a competitor analysis that's showing crop mixes from a variety of commercial farms around the country. These would be a type of competitor that you have to keep in mind when you're designing your marketing mix. But they can give you some good ideas for what kinds of crops to focus on, They'll show pricing in some cases. So that's a good place to do some competitor research.
Yep, and we have a few action items for today. One is to take the 4 Markets course on Upstart University so you can get a little bit more information on each of the places we mentioned selling into. Next would be to get out there, get some numbers, get a feel for your market, what opportunities might be there. And then finally, we'd like you to plug some of these numbers and crop information into the production estimates calculator. So in the PDF along with this session, there will be a link to a walkthrough of this calculator. So I'll take you through it, show you how to use it if you're not familiar with the calculator already, because we'll need those revenue numbers to plug into our spreadsheet in a few more sessions.
Perfect. So we're going to go ahead and walk through that production estimates calculator. If you want to see how we're doing that, please scroll down the page and click on the video, and we'll show you how we're designing our crop mix to meet the production, to meet the demand that we've identified. So that's all we have for today.
Yep, we'll see you at the next session.